Hello and welcome to the show. Now, when JSR Devon invited me to take part in a Chase the Cars video, I was very excited to go do some racing. However, slightly less excited about the vehicle I would be using, the BMW M4. You see, truth be told, none of the modern BMW M cars really interest me that much. And it's not me saying they're bad cars, I've just hardly driven them, because none of them inspire me, not in the same way that the likes of the E30 M3 did. This is perhaps the most modern BMW that I actually really quite like, whether it be in touring car guise, this autocross build, or just as a standard car. It's great fun to drive. Likewise, the classic M6, the classic M5, the M1, 2002 Turbo, they are all absolutely excellent cars. There are a few more modern ones that I do quite like. This 850, for example, I think looks absolutely fantastic, and having a V12 is always a big plus point. The downside is it weighs about as much of a ferry and isn't a particularly great handling vehicle, and likewise the V10 powered M5, I do have a little bit of a soft spot for super saloons and put a great big V10 engine in one, and yeah, I tend to quite like the crazy. Also, I actually do quite like the BMW i8. While, if at any point I ever had the money to buy one, this wouldn't be the car that I would go to. A lot of manufacturers have tried to make one of their up-to-date hybrid modern cars look futuristic, and most of them got it horribly, hideously wrong. The i3 is a perfect example. However, the i8 looks absolutely incredible if you ignore the fact that the rear bumper does look a little bit like it's giving birth to a Porsche 911. Once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. But from the front, it looks absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it's a pretty nice car to drive. So, with me having to go do some practice with the M4, it'll give me a good chance to see whether I had been wrong in not really giving these cars much of a thought. We start, though, with the looks. And I couldn't possibly say that the M4 was a hideous car, because it isn't. The problem I have with it is it's just a little bit generic. It's, yeah, an okay, kind of, you asked someone to draw a sports coupe, this is roughly what they would come up with looking at. It's just average, in my opinion. And when we get to the stats, things don't improve a huge amount. The engine, a 3-litre twin-turbocharged inline-6, has 431 horsepower, 405 torque, which, when you compare it to a normal everyday car, is pretty damn impressive. The problem is the M4 isn't going up against everyday normal cars. And while, yeah, 400 horsepower is not to be sniffed at in a rear-wheel drive vehicle, its competition from the likes of Mercedes and Audi have more power. So, when it comes to a game of top trumps, you certainly won't be winning with the BMW. However, raw figures are much less important than how the car actually drives, so what better place to test it out than Spa? One of the great racetracks of the world, a huge challenge for any vehicle to get around this circuit. I'll be honest, it's not my best racing circuit, however, I can certainly appreciate the challenge, and it's always a fun place to take cars around, so should be a good place to test out the M4. And unfortunately, things do not improve massively when you try to drive the car quickly. Again, compare it to a normal car and it is all very exciting and relatively fast. The thing is, it's got to do better. It's got to do better than that. I can't sit here and tell you that it's an absolutely awful car to drive. It isn't completely awful. The problem is, it's equally not amazing. It's not a standout vehicle. Now, those of you that watch my videos regularly know that I am not a fan when it comes to trying to hot lap a car, fan of an oversteery car. And the BMW isn't a particularly oversteery vehicle. It is relatively well planted. The problem is that there is so much understeer. The front end really does not get turned into corners very well. Now, this is a relatively light vehicle at 3,389 pounds for a modern car. That's not too bad in terms of weight, but it feels very, very heavy. Especially through these longer corners, it feels like an incredibly heavy vehicle. It feels quite unresponsive, is perhaps the best way of putting it. Yes, you can get the car through corners relatively fast, but it just feels a little bit numb in places. Again, If you are a bit of a moron and you poke it with a stick, yes, you can get the car sliding around and out of very, very low-speed corners. Yeah, you can get a bit of oversteer from the BMW, but then any 400 horsepower rear-wheel drive car, you poke it with a stick enough and you will be getting the back end sliding around. It's just, yeah, again, it's this whole, in general, it's okay, but there is nothing absolutely spectacular about it. Once you get past 130 miles an hour, or 120 miles an hour probably, it does start struggle to accelerate much more. Apparently the top speed is 187, but yeah, it certainly wasn't getting anywhere remotely near that. The brakes were okay, and this is, again, it's just a recurring theme with this vehicle. Everything about it was just... It was okay, but nothing stand out, nothing that made me think, yes, I've been wrong, I should have been driving this vehicle a lot more. However, perhaps a race would change my mind, and we certainly had an interesting one lined up. Devon was going to be driving a Formula 1 car. Now, of course, a M4 against a Formula 1 car is a little bit unfair, so the F1 car had to complete 3 laps around the Spa circuit. That's quite a big distance, while me, in a slightly upgraded M4, a little bit bigger tyres, a little bit less weight, a little bit more camber on my vehicle, just to try and keep the balance, would have to complete 2 laps. And then we would have a lemon. Driving a bubble car. Yes, AR12 would be driving the bubble car that would have to complete a single lap. Now, much slower car, the Isetta, however, a much shorter distance. So as much noise was made on the starting grid, mostly by the Formula 1 car, we would set off the F1 and very nearly have a lot of work to try and avoid the back of the Isetta. It's going to launch so horrendously fast. My M4, not too bad. Off the line, you can see as we head out, or sort of the exit of turn 1, how far ahead, there you go, you can just about see it in the distance, whizzing up towards Rowdy on the Formula 1 car. You can see the task that I had before me. I could not afford to make a single mistake with the M4, perhaps even more so than in normal racing. One slight outbraking moment from me, one slight miss of an apex or a bit too much oversteer would cost me massively in a race like this. Equally, the same could be said for the Formula 1 car, because, well, it is, you could see, clearly absurdly fast around a circuit like this. The amount of distance that he had to cover meant that, yeah, it was a very similar story for him. You could see how quick the Formula 1 car is by how much difficulty the replay cameras have in trying to keep up as it whizzes through these fast corners. Is a weird kind of pressure in a race like this, because there's not cars directly around you, but you know you can't afford to make a mistake. Meanwhile, in the bubble car, things were going quite slowly, really. It did manage to make it up towards the top of the hill. Down this long straight is painful in a car like this one. I think it gets up to 45-ish miles an hour, perhaps, down here. It's not very quick, but equally the same applies to the bubble car. You can't afford to make silly mistakes, and I know that sounds strange when we're talking about a car like this one. However, it is very easy to get into trouble. Rolling it over the curbs is a real hazard, and of course you end up rolling this and yes, definitely game over. The Formula 1 car was quickly on to its second lap and chasing down that bubble car, although it would have to get past the bubble car and then do another lap before it would beat it. And one of the interesting challenges for the Formula 1 car, and where it couldn't afford to lose time, is getting past the bubble car. Again, sounds absurd, but you could lose half a second, 3/4, or maybe in a full second, trying to pick your way past a slow car parked at the wrong point on the circuit. Sounds absurd because, yeah, the Formula 1 car massively faster. And, you know, you see him having to have a little bit of a lift, a little bit of a change of line as he came out of that corner. Little things like that would play into my favour. And at this stage, things were going relatively well for the M4. I had a nice clean opening lap as we headed down this long straight, but the pressure was still very much on. And as I said, it is very weird racing cars that you're not going to see until the very end of the race. You know, if everything's gone well, you're not going to see everybody until you get to the finish line. Very weird. However, you have to keep your focus up, and as I said, you just cannot afford to make a mistake. The bubble car was nearing, finally, the end of its first lap as we come in towards the bus stop, and things would go slightly awry for the Isetta. Too much curb on the inside, and the vehicle would be launched up onto two wheels. Not what you want as you are rushing towards the finish line, and especially not when you have two very quick cars, well, one absurdly quick car and one mildly quick car, trying to chase you down. Formula 1 car runs into the bus stop, can see the M4 as it's accelerating out of this final turn. The M4 is out of the corner quite quickly, but here comes the speed of the Formula 1 car, and it was incredibly close. It was incredibly close between these two. However, my M4 would just edge it as we take a look back from the BMW. It's lovely and neat around the final corner for me as we head up towards the finish line. The Isetta, in the end, just not quite able to get it to the line. The Formula 1 car was catching so fast towards that finish line, but I would take it. It was 0.4 of a second difference between my M4 and the F1 car. When you look at it, it does look like a little bit bigger a gap. I think it's about 2.5 car lengths-ish back from the M4. But you've got to bear in mind the closing speed between these two, the speed at which the F1 car is going compared to the speed at which the M4 is going at. It was a fantastic, fantastic challenge and an absolutely ridiculous finish. And I will be honest, I only won this race because I did an absolute miracle second lap with the M4. Somehow, I don't quite know how I did it, I managed to find a second. I went a second quicker than I'd ever gone around this circuit on that second lap to win by 0.4 of a second. So, yeah, an incredibly, incredibly close race, and some well-deserved celebratory donuts in the M4. Now, of course, we're not really going to be saying an M4 is quicker than a Formula 1 car. It was a good, fun race, nevertheless, to be taken part with. It was all kind of balanced out to have a close finish. And even with the slightly tuned and tweaked M4, while the race was fun because of the closeness and the sort of wacky idea, still the M4 hadn't massively endeared itself to me. And we come across an even bigger problem when we start talking about racing. And that is when we compare the M4 to its similar rivals. Let's take, for example, the Mercedes C63 AMG, 10,000 credits less than the BMW, or the Camaro Supersport. This is less than half the price of the M4. Both of them have more power and more torque than the BMW. Admittedly, they are slightly heavier cars. However, when it comes to a lap around a track, I took a whole selection of sort of similarly matched vehicles, similarly priced cars to see how they would fare, and things are not particularly good here for the BMW, as it's the slowest of the lot of them. It's not by a huge margin, don't get me wrong. And again, it's it's not an awful car to drive around this Top Gear circuit. However, it is 0.2 of a second down on an Audi RS5. It's a second slower than the Camaro SS and the Mercedes C63. And if we throw in the Shelby GT350R, which is 30,000 credits less than the BMW, well, that thing is monstrously fast. 4 seconds, or 4.5 seconds, in fact, faster than the M4. Yes, okay, admittedly, the Shelby is a little bit more of a track-focused vehicle. The Camaro, though, is not even the top model of the Camaro. The Z28, I don't know if it's quite out yet, but the Z28 would be even quicker than that. The C63 AMG, there'll probably be a black version of that at some point, admittedly very expensive, but yeah, the C63 is 1.5 seconds quicker than the M4. That is a lot of lap time to be losing out, and it's not as if the M4 is any more entertaining to drive. I could forgive it if it was more fun to drive than the cars around it, but it simply isn't. It's not crazy enough to be one of those cars that you want to go and take out for a drive just to have a laugh. Like the old C63 AMG Black Series was an absolutely bonkers, crazy, sideways machine, and it was great fun. It might not be the quickest car around a track, but it was really, really entertaining, silly fun. The M4 isn't that, but neither is it a really excellent handling, track-focused car that is, incredible to get perfect racing lines through corners. It just doesn't have the grip to get away with that. And it is up against some serious competition. Yes, you could argue, and absolutely I can't test, that to the likes of the Camaro and the Shelby, won't have the build quality of the BMW and probably won't be as comfortable. However, the American cars are getting better and better, and in the case of Camaro, less than half the price of the M4 at a second and a half quicker. That's a big time gap, and you know the same can't be said for the Audi or the Mercedes. Yeah, the Audi here is the most expensive at 110,000 credits, but the all-wheel drive Audis are, well, notorious for being rather understeery, and the RS5 is more responsive, more entertaining to drive in many ways. The C63 is 10,000 credits less than the M3. It is the heaviest car here at 3,900 pounds, and yet again the Mercedes feels lighter than the BMW. It feels more responsive, it feels more alive than the M4. So really that is the final nail in the coffin for the BMW. While, yes, when you do compare it to your normal, average, everyday road-going cars, it is all very exciting. However, against this competition, I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong in kind of overlooking these new M cars. Hopefully, and maybe one day, things will turn around, and maybe my opinions will change. But at the moment, it's just not inspiring enough and not exciting enough to go at driving and to be a vehicle that I would pick. Now, a big thank you goes out to JSR Devon for inviting me to take part in the Chase the Car race. If you want to see the full video from that race, you should go and check out his channel. There will be a link in the description to that video. There'll also be a link for AR12's perspective when he puts his video up. That is going to be it from me, though. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.